Let's look at another example of solving an inequality involving absolute values. So in this case, we have absolute value, and there's a +3. And so first thing we want to do is to isolate the absolute value. So we can use the tip we have. This step is very similar to solving equations involving absolute values. If you have anything outside absolute value, we do need to get rid of it first. So in this case, we're going to get rid of that +3 there by subtracting 3 from both sides. So that we have x absolute value of x minus 1 greater than or equal to 8. Next, we can use the tip we have. The tip says, so again, this greater than or equal to, intuitively, if you have this graph number line in your mind, you want a distance to be more than 8 miles away from the center, 0. So it's like two ends. So you're going to have to be graphically. You don't have to draw this graph, but if you do, it's you can have this picture in your mind. It's going to be these two ends. So it's going to be either greater than 8 or less than -8. But you can use the tip to do it. So we take the inside quantity, whatever that is, x minus 1, and we keep the inequality sign greater than or equal to 8. But we're going to flip the sign, make it reverse the sign, less than or equal to -8 for that opposite, the left-hand side, a negative number. And because we got two ends, we got to use the word or. So that means if it's greater than, if the absolute value is greater than something, you got to use the word or. The reason, again, is because it's one or the other. You cannot be smaller on the left side of -8 and also at the same time on the right side of 8. It can only be either here or there. But for less than case, you got to use the word and, because it's between -12 and +12. So it's one whole piece there. Okay, now we can solve each inequality because without absolute value signs, we can solve for x by doing opposite operations. So x less than or equal to -7. We keep the word or there. Okay, here I summarized the steps here, comparing the steps to solving equations. The first step is the same. Whenever you see absolute value is not by itself, we have to get it by itself. So in the first example, it's already by itself, so we didn't have to do step 1. But in the second case, we had to get rid of -3. The reason for that is the tips or the graphs when I draw, we're only talking about absolute value, which is the distance. And so if the distance is greater than 3, then the inside is going to be on the right side of 3 or on the left-hand side of 3, -3. So we cannot have anything on the outside of absolute value sign. So that's why we got to first isolate the absolute value. Step 2 is going to be different. For equations, it's easy. We just set the inside equal to positive or negative of the number on the outside of the equation. But for inequality, there are two cases we got to do. So we still take the quantity inside. Don't change the quantity inside, whatever that is. If it's x minus 1, you keep it as x minus 1. You're not going to change it to x plus 1. If it's -3x, it stays as -3x. You're not going to change it to +3x. I explained in the previous video, the absolute value of this cannot be absolute value of each one added together. It doesn't work that way. Now, this tip pretty much comes, so this is a tip I summarized, but that comes from the graph. It's just the easy way for you to memorize instead of drawing the graph each time. So we keep the inequality sign for the positive of the right side number, but we reverse it for the negative. So as we see in the previous examples, so we keep less than for +12. Flip it, greater than becomes greater than for the negative. Because why it's greater than? Because these numbers are bigger than -12 right here. And similarly, we keep greater than for 8 because it's on the right side of 8. But these numbers are smaller than -8, so that's why you have to flip it. But either case can be summarized in one tip. Keep it for positive. flip it for negative. So that's the tip for you to memorize. And again, the word, one of them is or, the other is and depending on whether you have two ends or one whole piece in the middle. Okay, some of the mistakes that I saw solving equations or inequalities involving absolute values. Let me put it right here. So again, one of them is whenever you see this, you cannot take absolute value of each one. So the absolute value is not equal to absolute value of x plus absolute value of -1. That doesn't work. I can show you an example. So if x is, if x is 3, and we know apparently 3 minus 1, we're supposed to work the inside first. So 3 minus 1 gives us 2. The absolute value of 2 is 2. But if you try to use this formula, say, okay, let's put 3 in here, 3 for x. And you're going to take absolute value of 3, and then plus absolute value of the second number, -1. Then you're going to get absolute value of 3 is 3, and plus absolute value of -1, which is +1, you're going to get 4. And that's apparently wrong. It's not 4, it should be 2. So it tells us there's no such rule. When you have something minus something inside absolute value or something plus something inside absolute value, we cannot take absolute value of each number and add them together. You just have to leave it as it is. Okay, that's the first mistake. Second mistake, so I put a warning here, don't do this. So this is incorrect. Second mistake that I often saw is some students, they completely ignore the absolute value. For example, when they have, suppose they have this equation, they just treat it like there's no absolute value. They completely ignore the absolute value sign. They just add 1 to both sides. Okay, they cancel each other, and then I got x greater than or equal to 9, and that's incorrect. Again, you cannot do that. The absolute value signs, you do have to take that into consideration. When you add 1 to both sides, when you do this 1 on the left-hand side, when you add 1 to the left-hand side also has absolute value. So if you add 1 to the left-hand side, because usually we write it vertically, but if you write horizontally, this is what you're going to get. And this +1 is not going to cancel that -1. And that's another mistake. You cannot say -1 plus 1, they cancel each other. That's incorrect. Because this number is inside absolute value, this number is outside absolute value, they cannot be added. Similarly, in this example, I cannot add a -1 and a +3, because 1 is inside, 1 is outside absolute value. They cannot be added. For a number outside absolute value, you can get rid of it. But for a number inside absolute value, you cannot do opposite operation to get rid of it. Okay, so they just cannot be combined. And the other mistake I often saw is some students forget to reverse the inequality sign for the negative number, and they have both greater than, and then they have both less than. That is also incorrect. So a few possible mistakes, and try to avoid.